I was recently revisiting some old press conferences and video game reviews, and what struck me wasn't just the nostalgia, but how many of the grand promises made back then actually came to pass. Even the not-so-commercially successful consoles of past generations, such as the GameCube, Wii U, and Dreamcast, have grown more interesting in hindsight. Yet, here we are nearly 4 years into the current generation, and it feels less like the biggest generational transition our industry has yet seen, and more like an incremental step forward from the PlayStation 4 Pro and Xbox One X. Looking back at the initial hype, or at least at the claims that were made, it's hard to escape the feeling that we're going through a generation of empty promises, but who should we blame for it? I'm gonna first take a step back and contextualize things from my perspective, which means that I'm not going to focus on every console available at the time. Instead, I'll focus on those that I spent the most time with. The first generational shift I remember was the move from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo, and to be honest, my kid brain couldn't really notice a massive difference in the games themselves, but I knew that they were different machines and one of those was supposed to be the Super. The next generational leap, however, would be impossible to miss. Not only because of how impactful it was, but also in a personal way because the PlayStation 1 was the first console I had at home. And in just 3 years we went from games looking like this to games looking like this. It also brought in extra buttons and controller layouts that finally seemed fit for a proper home console experience rather than some repurposed arcade setup. The 6th generation, which is considered by many to be the golden age of consoles, truly lives up to its reputation. We sadly had Sega leaving the race, but Microsoft coming in with their Xbox. And every console in that generation had their own unique style, and as exclusive games were still a major thing to consider, it made sense to own all of them if you could afford it, but I couldn't. Again, the graphical leap was impressive, and in just 2 years we went from Gran Turismo 2 looking like this, to Gran Turismo 3 looking like this. The jump from 2D to 3D was a success, and we already had the blueprint for how controllers, control schemes, and 3D worlds were supposed to work. Beyond visuals, games pushed new boundaries. They proved certain genres could work on consoles, with Halo being a prime example, and they evolved nearly every aspect of gaming. And with more capable hardware and the extra storage provided by DVDs, games were able to be much more complex and cinematic. It's also worth noting that these were the first consoles with internet connectivity, but that aspect would take center stage in the next releases. And the more I think about the 7th generation, the more I feel like it's my favorite, and I want to make a full video about it, so I won't dive too deep here. But it's clear that Microsoft, Nintendo, and Sony all approached it with the mindset of defining what gaming should be. And again, they had different machines and even different ways of interacting with the games. Microsoft and Nintendo had huge successes, and Sony was at the height of their overconfidence, making a pricing and positioning mistake that would cost them greatly in the first few years. But at the end of the day, I think we can call that generation a success for all three of them. It turned consoles into fully connected machines, brought in HDMI, wireless controllers, online stores, and friends lists. Most importantly, it delivered strong iterations of existing franchises and introduced new IPs that last to this day. The 8th generation would be a huge success for Sony, a major misstep for Xbox, and a rocky start for Nintendo with the Wii U, and then a dream come true with the Switch. It also had buffed up versions of the consoles with the PlayStation 4 Pro, the Xbox One X, and the Switch OLED, which is something that I hoped wouldn't become a thing, but a PlayStation 5 Pro seems inevitable. To be fair, we definitely had a moment of this generation has no games, and the graphical leap was much more incremental, but overall we still had good games, new IPs, and the solidification of digital libraries and services. And once the Switch took over, Nintendo's been on the roll in the last years, showing that the balance between technological advancements and meaningful gameplay experiences is what really matters. Overall, each generation brought unique innovations that shaped gaming as we know it, whether through technical leaps, new ways of playing with others, different methods of distributing games, or the creation of new IPs that remain relevant today. Which finally brings us to the current generation of consoles, the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series. Released in 2020, which, to put it mildly, was a very uncommon year, these consoles were brought into the market on promises of more capable hardware and another significant evolution in game design. We were told about how higher resolutions and ray tracing would impact the way we play, and how SSDs would allow for more complex open worlds with virtually no loading times. Well, it's been almost 4 years, and aside from the reduced loading times, not much has changed. If you ask some people out there what are the defining games of this generation so far, you might get answers like God of War Ragnarok, Gran Turismo 7, Horizon Forbidden West, Cyberpunk, and Elden Ring. You know what all of these games have in common? They're cross-gen releases. No one in their right mind would have expected Gran Turismo 3 to be released on PlayStation 1 or that God of War 3 should also have a PlayStation 2 version, but Gran Turismo 7 and God of War Ragnarok were released for the PlayStation 4 along with many other games. And to be clear, cross-gen is actually a good thing for gamers, allowing people with older hardware to still be able to play new games, but that also becomes a liability when half of your current user base is still using the PlayStation 4, and I imagine that for some of these folks it's not a financial thing, they just don't see a reason to upgrade. And cross-gen games do run better on current-gen consoles, with higher resolutions, more graphical fidelity, perhaps even with ray tracing and better frame rates, so at least technically they've delivered on some claims, but is it enough? Now, I don't regret buying my current consoles, but if they weren't backwards compatible and if I had to play only their exclusives, I don't think I would have bought them. And if you think I'm overreacting, aside from the VR titles, those are the PlayStation 5 only games as of this video. Even when we talk about the innovations this generation introduced, like the PS5 DualSense with its adaptive triggers and haptic feedback, few games actually make use of everything it can offer. And again, if you think I'm being too harsh, please go in the comments and name 5 games that let you use the accelerometer and gyroscope to aim or control the characters, or that have different shooting patterns for the adaptive triggers. And that's the main issue. Most of the promises made about this generation focus on performance improvements, which are nice to have, but they don't mean much if they don't bring anything new to the table, and as the amount of cross-gen games suggests, it seems they haven't. Even when we take the performance claims at face value, we still have examples of games running at 720p or struggling to maintain a stable frame rate. But at the end of the day, consoles are just tools for us to play games. They don't write the code, create the characters, or design the levels. They aren't the ones pushing certain trends or alienating players through microtransactions or politics. We now have hardware capable enough that the limitations no longer come from how many polygons it can render, but rather from the minds of developers, writers, and designers. And with the design by committee approach, games take longer and longer to produce, often leaving developers with less creative input than they should have. There's also, I feel, lots of people who had no previous interest in gaming but came to work in the industry anyways because the money was good. They might not know or acknowledge who their core audience is, and they're always one step behind, chasing trends and trying to outdo the competition. This often leads to complete flops or decisions that alienate a significant portion of the real audience. And as many game studios have become publicly traded companies, they also have to worry about shareholders, board meetings, quarterly reports, and stock prices. Now, we're all adults here and we understand that funding is crucial and people work for financial rewards, but this financial focus can sometimes steer games in directions that go against the interest of the players. This issue isn't exclusive to gaming, it's something that we've seen across movies and TV shows, where creative stagnation has become increasingly common in recent years. Another bad trend is the pursuit of realism or graphical fidelity in ways that don't add anything meaningful to gameplay and don't justify the performance cost. One of the most notorious things about the 7th generation were the issues with the early Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 models, and they also had performance issues pretty much throughout the entirety of its life cycle. The promise of 1080p and 60 frames per second was definitely not met, but the games were so good that it didn't matter. Sure, some games can benefit greatly from a performance upgrade, but a PlayStation 5 Pro is not going to fix many of the mediocre releases we've seen lately. I also don't believe the core audience for games has changed that much over the years. The executives and writers may have changed, but the core consumers probably haven't, at least not as drastically as some marketing departments might think. And I don't have a magic solution to fix these issues, but as the saying goes, insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. If the foundation of your game is flawed from the start, no amount of performance improvement will make it better. Now, some of you might be thinking that the writing's on the wall, that we're likely seeing the last true console generation, with PC gaming poised to take over as the future of the industry. Even though I enjoy playing on PC and have been doing so for years, I'll be the first to say that it isn't for everyone, and I can illustrate that in 2 different ways. First, there's the fatigue factor. For those of us who work on PCs all day, especially if you work from home, the last place you want to spend your free time is sitting at the same chair staring at the same screen. It feels like you're just logging extra hours at work. The second is the technical barrier. Some people simply don't have the patience or the technical knowledge to put up with certain issues. And let me give you an example. I recently wanted to play the original Dead Space from 2008. On Xbox, all I had to do was install the game and start playing. But on PC, I first had to install the EA launcher, then within minutes I noticed that the game wasn't running well, so I had to find a tutorial on how to fix it. This led me to download the mouse fix and lock the game at 60 frames per second on the driver panel. Nothing too difficult, but it highlights the comfort and simplicity that consoles provide and how important it is to a lot of people. By now, you can probably guess where I'm going with this. The Steam Deck has shown that it's possible to have a standardized PC with settings pre-built by developers, and for a company like Microsoft that would probably be a dream come true. Have a PC system running a modified version of Windows 11, marketed as the next Xbox under whatever name they come up with. This could appeal to people who lack the patience to tweak settings or worry about whether a game is going to run. I don't think Nintendo is going to make that move anytime soon, but as Sony is already releasing most of its games on PC anyways, that also wouldn't be too out of reach. It might not be the biggest generational leap we've ever seen, as prices would need to stay within certain limits, but it could offer a way to further boost independent games, access to different online stores, emulation, and create a more cohesive install base. As counterintuitive and defeatist as it might sound, perhaps we need less capable machines that force companies to take less time to develop games and evolve gameplay and mechanics instead of visuals. Even better if we can offer gaming machines at lower costs. And for those who want to run everything at ultra settings, you can still build your own system. As Nintendo has shown with their underpowered Switch, gaming is about much more than the highest resolution or the most realistic graphics. It's about pushing the boundaries in storytelling, design, gameplay, and making fun games. And those things are no longer limited by hardware. Despite the great hardware, the current gen has yet to deliver on its promise of truly transformative gaming experiences. It's a reminder that we shouldn't measure things solely in teraflops and frame rates, but in the ability to create meaningful and memorable experiences. And I'm not saying they are mutually exclusive, but we have to set our priorities right. The industry needs to consider how sustainable it is for games to take 5 years or longer to develop and cost dozens if not hundreds of millions only for a single flop to shut down an entire studio. That can't be all that modern gaming has to offer. But as I said in a recent video, if you are a patient gamer, we might be in the golden age for gaming in general, with plenty of options to choose from. And as video game generations typically last 5 to 7 years, there's still time to fill the next couple of years with great games and meaningful evolutions in world design and gameplay. As someone who likes consoles, I really hope this video ages badly at the end of this generation, but we can't ignore that whether due to the challenging start in 2020 or the current state of the industry, empty promises have been made. And maybe that's the inevitable fate of consoles, and soon we'll all be playing on some sort of PC or a hybrid Nintendo machine, but until that reality comes to pass, what I hope is that this generation turns things around and the next wave of games in the second half of the cycle is a positive surprise. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like and a comment. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.